Hello, everybody. Welcome, fellows, VCCA Fellows, and others. I'm Lex Williford, a writer, a VCCA Fellow, and Fellows Council member. Welcome to my home. Try not to look too much at the clutter behind me. I have two young kids, 11 and 12, in quarantine for 2 months now. And thankfully, we've all survived. I hope you're all safe and well. I'm honored to be hosting this, the second reading in VCCA's virtual Fireplace Reading Series. Thanks to you all for joining us, to Sheila Pleasance, our fearless leader, and to Tim Doty, who in a short time on the job has found many innovative ways of letting us share our work virtually during this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday marking 100,000 deaths in the US, the most of any country in the world. Something I want to say just briefly, because VCCA means a lot to me. More than any other artist residency I've been to, and I've been to many, I've always felt most at home at VCCA. Like I'm hanging out with family, sharing intimate stories along with all of our artistic struggles. Well, maybe not my family, since most of my family in Dallas are members of a disturbing cult of personality. One of them is a sister who lives in a white gated community and who stopped seeing the many orange-haired mastodons in the dining room many years ago. Anyway, VCC offers the comfort and trust we need to make art about things that make us uncomfortable, disturb us. VCC artists understand what Cesar Cruz means when he writes, "Comfort the disturbed, disturb the comfortable." And there's no better place to comfort each other as we make our art than at VCCA. That's especially true now when the artistic intimacy we experience alone, our work now more solitary than ever. Even though we can't share it during meals in the VCCA dining hall or readings around the VCCA fireplace, we can share our lives' works here. Now, nowadays, in a time of hatred, lies, unspeakable racism and cruelty, novelists and poets have once again become both journalists resisting misinformation and real historians courageous enough to write our truest and most intimate histories. And I think that's certainly true of the two readers we have for today. Damn, that was cheerful, wasn't it? Yikes. Everyone doing okay? After that, maybe not. Sorry about that. Have you got your snacks and popcorn, wine and beer already? Maybe not. Okay. I brought along this. Cheers. Okay, let's do this. Tonight's first reader will be Nandi Comer, author of Tapping Out. A new book, terrific book of poetry about something I love almost as much as the people of El Paso, where I live, and Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. And the students I've taught for 20 years who come to class on that day and Halloween wearing colorful masks of calaveras, flowered skulls, and masks of luchadores, masked Mexican wrestlers, men and women who wear their masks as a kind of intimate performance art, using their great bodies and masks of power and identity, not so much to hide their identities or even to remain anonymous, but to reveal themselves more fully, creating empowering cultural myths and legends. Nandi's work, her latest book, is about luchadores, and I really admire it. I think she's going to read from some other work of hers, considering the times we live in. Nandi, do you want to start us off?
Thanks for having me, and thank you so much, VCCA, for all the space that you've given us writers to do the work that is so important. And also, I just have to say thank you, because I really do remember working through a lot of the poems that came out of that are in this first collection in my studio in Virginia. And it was, I mean, it was really an important space. It's also one of the places where I recall seeing the names of all the writers who came before me. And it just was really important to see that I felt like I was writing within the company of the writers, of the artists that were there, but also artists who had come before me. And so today's reading is also, I'm thinking about the time. So unfortunately, I'm just not really thinking about wrestling in that way. I'm thinking about mourning and how we have been having to grapple as a community, both with illness and violence and it's just showing what America has done to us as a community. And so I'm going to read one poem that is it's not actually wrestling related, but I'll read it from this collection, and then I'm going to read another poem from my chapbook. The title is in Spanish, and it's just a comment that the president of Mexico said about his countrymen coming here to work. And the title is Están haciendo los trabajos ni siquiera los negros quieren hacer. And that just translates to they're doing the work that not even the Blacks want to do. And in Spanish, there's some Spanish in here, and it's all just a repetition of "you have me working like a slave." Ay Dios. We are in the computer lab when I hear it. A voice purr from a mouth stain the air. I hear it whine over our keyboards like a sad mosquito. Come too late in the season. Ay Dios. It's grading time, and we teachers crowd into the school's only lab the way teachers with grading must. Me tienes aquí trabajando. We all have a load. We all face our computers and pick at our students' labor. We check boxes and the room stays quiet until, ay Dios, me tienes aquí trabajando como un negro. Her sigh and groan, I hear it. Me tienes aquí trabajando como un negro. Others hear it. Me tienes aquí trabajando. I don't have to look up to see who said it. I never have to look to see who's saying, como un negro. I am always como un negro. The voice crawls to me, como un negro trabajando. 2. Ay, Nandi, no seas aquí. Aquí en Mexico no hay racismo porque no hay negros. Nandi, don't be that way. Here in Mexico, there isn't racism because there aren't any Blacks. 3. You have me working like a slave. You got me working like a nigger. Me tienes trabajando como un negro. Never in my cotton picking years. You alligator bait, you fortune cookie, you Indian giver. How to let the tongue do its work down my leather-skinned back. What offense was not meant is dealt, is taken. Dig into the weighty work of song, dirt, laundry. Widen a crater for all the sounds. Wetback, gypsy, coon, coolie, slack, limp words, pitch them down the center of O, of job. Let the work fall in. So I'm just going to read 2 other pieces today from a chapbook that I wrote called American Family, a Syndrome. And this is really just where I am today and thinking about people in our community who have had to endure state-sanctioned violence for generations. Why I don't call on cops. If my brother locks himself into a bathroom and thinks his body has shattered into a constellation of broken light, if for 3 hours I plead for him to unlatch the door and let me in, even if his brain refuses to let go, get a hold of itself, I do not call. Though his thoughts are lost in the slim slant of night and his head overswamped in lead, though he takes off again, running through the living room, turning over kitchen spoons and threatens me with a potato peeler, I do not call. How can I trust they won't treat him like a corpse? I have watched the ballet of brutality break the bodies of strangers. I have seen the limp drag of a bird's bulleted wing. A mind set to pasture would chew on its own blood source. I am pleading with my brother, they will not love you. Or I'm yelling as high as my lungs can yell, I will not call. Or I am only trying to say, when my head takes its risk, let it bloom, let it devour its dead limbs. Dear reader, this is a private conversation, Americana circa all the centuries, on a city canvas or southern back road or blog. Dear Trayvon, look what you started. Torso reclined on pale boulder, head tucked under right elbow, left hand still in coat pocket. Dear reader, please do not read any further. I try to ignore your face and peace sign. Michael, your mother crying next to Trayvon's mother, next to Sean's mother, next to Emmett's ghost. Dear woman in another city, I am ready to mourn you. I am not talking to you. Death designs my face. Dear reader, dear cell phone, please stay in your pockets, your purse. Do not record. Do not post. If there is blood, the artist chose to omit it. Dear sheriff, dear sergeant, dear security guard, and the boy remains transfixed in his last breath. Dear principal, dear counselor, dear parent, dear man I am passing, my name is. Dear internet, please do not post my slaughter. Dear every man I know, stop, don't move, don't put your hands up, do not stop, remain. Dear unnamed Black man killed again and again and again. Dear, are you surprised? Dear reader, no. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandi. That's beautiful. Wow. Our second reader tonight is Sandell Morse. His new memoir, The Spiral Shell, A French Village Reveals Its Secrets of Jewish Resistance in World War II, recounts the history of the long silent stories of courage and resistance in a French town during World War II. A, quote, truth that went underground, as most truths seem to do these days. An intimate history of memory, including facts based upon Sandell's complex research and truths denied to her as a child, that broadens her understanding of her Jewish heritage and history on the 80th anniversary of World War II. Stories about many people, including Adele, murdered with her family in Auschwitz, and the, quote, mysterious reappearance of their suitcases still intact and unpacked decades later. Sandell's published in some of the best magazines in the country, Plowshares, Fourth Genre, New England Review. Sandell?
Oh, thank you so much. Nandi, I can't start without acknowledging your absolutely powerful, powerful work, and to say to you that I understand that hope and prayers are not what we need, and what we need is action. And I'm sorry. I just am sorry. That's just start there. And now I will do a huge thank you to VCCA and to everyone who has put this Fireplace series together. It's wonderful, particularly for someone like me who had her very first book come out in mid-April in the middle of a pandemic. And truthfully, without VCCA, there would be no book. I've been coming to VCA for many, many years. I began in the late 80s, and I came on and off for a number of years. And that was as a fellow in Virginia. It wasn't until 2011 that I applied for and got a residency in France. And so I began researching Auvillard, and I discovered that Auvillard was on the Pilgrim's route, Santiago del Compostela to Santiago del Compostela in Spain and the Shrine of St. James. Well, when I think of pilgrims and pilgrimage routes, I think of Crusaders. When I think of Crusaders, I think of Jews. Then when I think of Jews and Europe, I think of the Second World War, and I began to wonder about the village's World War II history. I had met wonderful poet Marilyn Callett at VCCA, and I knew that she had been to Moulin Nef. I knew that she had researched some of this history. And so I emailed her, and she sent me a name. And that name was Jean Hirsch, or Hirsch. And this was a boy, age 9, who was a resistance courier during the war. Well, 2 things interested me. 1, that he was so young, and 2, that we shared a name. My maiden name is Hirsch, but I really was not on any sort of a genealogical search, but still there was enough of a connection there to really hook me, and that's where this book began. I'm going to read you a bit from the very beginning so that I don't have to explain anything. So here we go. I knew so little of my own history. On my father's side, I had 2 names, Henriette Ducasse and Jacques Hirsch, my great-great-grandparents, both born in Héricourt, France, a commune in the Alsace that used to go back and forth between France and Germany, a spoil of war. Newly married, the couple sailed into New York Harbor, and as far as the family knew, they washed up onto American shores without a past. My father told me only those names, no names of parents, grandparents, sisters, or brothers, no stories of a family's joys or its heartbreaks and struggles. Whatever had gone before evaporated into the air of a brand new world. My father told me stories of his family's American successes, a brownstone on the Upper East Side, a shoe store on Fifth Avenue, a block long, he would say, the space between his gesturing hands growing wider and wider. For me, a child given to fantasy and fairy tales, that shoe store grew into an department store and the brownstone into a castle. Yet there was truth to my father's stories. I had a newspaper clipping dated 1902, probably from the society pages of the Hartford Courant, announcing a marriage and listing the elegant wedding presents received, among them being a check of a large amount from Leo M. Hirsch, an uncle of the groom. This was my great-grandfather, proprietor of that block-long shoe store. The Hirsches were German Jews, Reform Jews, aspiring to both social status and wealth, assimilation their goal. My father taught me that being Jewish was no different from being Christian. It's a religion, that's all, he would say, as if to convince himself as well. He wanted me to pass, and he wanted to pass, not inside the house or among fellow Jews, but in the Christian world. He insisted Hirsch was a German, not a Jewish name. For years, I didn't know he was wrong about our name, but I did know he was wrong about Judaism and Christianity. Growing up, I shared things with my Jewish friends I didn't share with my Gentile friends, a nod, a glance, a touch on the shoulder. I knew, too, there were places I wasn't welcome. Once visiting Grandma Rose, my father's mother, and Harry, my step-grandfather, in Miami Beach, where they spent winters, I saw a sign in a window of a boarding house, no Jews. I saw signs over drinking fountains, colored, white, with or without signs, America named its outsiders. In that old newspaper clipping, the word reverend replaced rabbi. Temple replaced synagogue. The ceremony was performed by the Reverend Mr. Levy of the Orange Street Temple. When you changed rabbi to reverend, you tossed away centuries of learning letting assimilation subsume knowledge and culture. When I was a child, school forms asked for my religion. Write Hebrew, my father would say. What's wrong with putting Jewish? Just do it. My friends didn't go around calling themselves Hebrews. we were Jewish. We didn't say Jew, an insult. And because we were growing up in the shadow of the Second World War, we knew about concentration camps, gas chambers, and lampshades made of human skin. We whispered about those lampshades on the playground, the way we whispered about sex, knowing and not knowing, believing and not believing. So then eventually I get to Ovilar, and my stories begin to spiral. And I am introduced to a woman named Germaine Polyakov, who at the time I met her was 92, and she lived outside of Paris. And she was a caretaker in a home that protected Jewish refugee children during the war. This was a secret house. And Germaine was the widow of Leon Polyakov, who was a famous historian, and he actually accompanied the French delegation to Nuremberg, and he was also in the resistance during the war. And everyone, of course, came to the flat to see Leon and not Germaine. The other person, I don't think nope, I think that's about all you have to know. This is going to be very, very short. But Germaine passed away in February of this year. And I absolutely adored her. And I just have to read a little something about her. I asked about a single day Germaine remembered vividly. Germaine folded her hands loosely in her lap and spoke of a day in 1944 when German soldiers were marching through Bayeux-sur-Dordogne and heading to Normandy. They were nervous, edgy, and shooting wildly. Germaine rounded her hands and drew a dome in front of her belly. I was expecting my third child, carrying my baby in one arm, dragging Daniel by his hand, and running across a field to the woods. I heard a shot. I knew what it was. I wasn't frightened. I felt calm. I don't know why. Naturally, she was frightened, but fear propelled her and gave her strength. A pregnant woman carrying her baby, dragging her toddler, her heart pounding, her belly cramping, adrenaline pumping her legs. I looked into my cup of golden tea. How did she find her way through all that, then integrate into the person she had become? Thank you.
Thank you, Sandell and Nandi. There's two really moving readings. We're going to shift over. I think we have time to do a Q&A. I'm looking here to see if anyone has any questions for Nandi or Sandell. Anyone want to type something up? If anyone has a question for, yeah, it says here. Okay. I guess, can everyone read these comments? They're really wonderful.
No.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments. They're, I just wanted to say, yeah, Alonzo Davis, I see your comment there. And I think that, yeah, a lot of people have lived these moments. So I think it's important that we recognize that this is, these are much more common occurrences than a lot of people want to recognize. So thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that Patricia Smith has joined us. That's awesome. Christina is here. Andrea Carter Brown. Does anyone have a question?
There was one question here. How did your poetry help you through these miserable times, or does it? Well, I think that it's been the work of a lot of poets to respond in the best way that they can. And sometimes it occurs through poetry, sometimes it's occurring through anything. I think a lot of community members feel that way. When we first went through lockdown, I really wasn't writing because I am one of those people that have like a 9 to 5, very much outside of the gig community. So I've actually been working remotely, and that has its own stress. And so what happened was some people have been asking me about writing, and people have solicited me to write pieces, and those have pulled me out of what I consider like the distraction from poetry, my like busy work of 9-to-5 work. And I have had these opportunities to write, but the poems that I wrote, the poems that I read from the chapbook particularly came as a response of this was 4 or 5 years ago now. I was responding to what was happening online. I was responding to what was happening in our community, and I felt late responding to them. So it feels really strange that like I can read these poems now and they still feel responsive, even though I'm not like writing them at this moment. Going back to them feels, I don't feel like they're that dated, which actually feels quite sad. So I'm going to write another statement.
Yes, and of course, these terrible things keep happening again and again and again, as you point out in your poem. It's very difficult. This has been probably the most depressed I've been, and I've sort of leaned toward depressive anyway. But anyway, it's just been a very difficult time. Sandell?
Yes.
Do you want to join us here? Yes. Did you say that you spent a great deal of time in the town in France that you were staying at? Did you meet quite a few people? Did you have interviews with those people?
Yeah, this started in 2011, and the book has come out now. So I think that I went back every year over and over for about a month. I started with a residency in Moulin-la-Nef, and then I was very fortunate. I was able to go back on my own after that. And I have no idea what propelled me. I just kept going and going and going. I think someone said to me, this was the book that you've been writing all your life. And I think that person is correct.
Right. That's great. That's wonderful. Nandi, I know you didn't read any of the poems about luchadores, but one thing, I have my Dia de los Muertos mask here. It's Star Wars, Dia de los Muertos. Anyway.
My masks are all in another room. I have masks in my living room.
Oh, do you really? Oh, cool.
Masks. They're the wrestling masks. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm fascinated by the way that you use masks, the luchadores masks, which are really very bright, really beautiful, but also kind of creepy and scary and powerful and all kinds of things. I was wondering, because it seems to me that you're using masks. We tend to associate masks with hiding, right? But in the case of this, the masks themselves are very powerful symbols of empowerment and all the rest of it. I'm wondering if you could say something about that in that book. I'm just curious because I got a chance to read it and loved it.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think you are pointing to something that I think through different kind of techniques, the idea is that like, I think a lot of people think about when I say I wrote a book that has a lot of poems about wrestling, I think a lot of people think that it's a collection of poems that's just Mexican that's just about me going to the matches or research that I've done on the sport. And really the book does a lot to think about identity and how I have gone through masking. How do we think about, as writers, how do we think about persona as a mask? I'm really using it as a metaphor to really interrogate a lot of things. And so for me, it really is like an unveiling and unmasking for me. It does allow me to work through a lot of different issues. I think if someone were to ask me what the book was about, I'd be like, oh, well, it's about gender and race and violence and growing up and all these other things that, and then I would say, oh yeah, and then there's like, it's about Lucha Libre.
No, that's cool. Thank you. I think we have one question from, let's see, where is it? Sherazad, WP. The question is, are you finding yourself drawn to other art forms? This will probably be the last question we can do because I know we're going to run out of time. Do you want to answer that? I think that's directed at you, Nandi.
Am I drawn to other art forms?
Yeah, are you drawn to other art forms?
I am. But I think so. While I am very much engaged in the discipline and craft of writing, I love dance. I definitely participate in, I'm always dancing. And some people know me as a DJ. I have a lot of different hats, a lot of different artist hats. Wrote a whole suite of poems about techno with DJing and stuff like that. So I do think that while I am drawn to other art forms, I love being in places like VCCA where I can interact with other artists who are much more disciplined in other art forms, who are much more professionalized, for lack of a better word. I think it's really important to me to practice other art forms in order to come back to poetry, because I think that if we're only sitting in poetry, if you're only reading poems and you're only looking at the way that people have created poems and you're only looking at your own work, I think practicing and engaging in other art forms is a lot like reading and experiencing the work of other artists. It's inspiring. It gives you different technique. It makes you look at craft in a different way. But I mean, I also think of physics as another kind of art form to look at and draw from and read from and think about how that discipline can also be applied to poetry.
So Lex, there is a question that asks what feedback I have been getting about writing about the Holocaust. And I'd like to answer that because I really haven't been getting any feedback. And the Holocaust was a subject I never, ever, ever wanted to touch. I avoided it constantly at all costs. And then suddenly I found myself immersed in it. And it was shocking. And I don't know, I questioned my right to do it. I questioned my knowledge as a non-historian. My knowledge is nothing. I was a writer. I wasn't an historian. Who was I to even touch it? And then I began to understand that what I was really doing was telling other people's stories. And I was so touched by the women that I interviewed, particularly, and the lives that they had led. And Germaine welcomed me so into her house, her flat. And you want my story? You want yes, I want your story. So I felt empowered by that. But I almost find, and I'm wondering if I am finding an avoidance in any questions about that. I don't know.
Right. It's funny because I think the very things that we don't want to write about are the things that we have to write about. If I'm not absolutely terrified by writing, I feel like I'm just typing, right? And so being able to go into that dark place and to be able to share those stories with them sounded like a really exciting thing to do. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions here. If not, I guess we can call it a night. This has been awesome. Quite a few people have showed up, and I really thank you all for joining us. And I congratulate you, Nandi and Sandell, on your recent publications. I wish that we were able to sit and listen to these readings live, but hey, this works.
Hey, yeah.
And it's a great gift that VCCA has given to us. So thank you all for joining us, and I guess we'll call it a night.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
So much to everyone that tuned in, I guess, logged on. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Have a good night.